Hi, it's Andy from PCR Global with a video from our A to Z of risk management playlist. These videos are short enough not to induce boredom, but important enough to keep at the front of our minds and on the tips of our tongues whilst we're on the front line of safety. Today's letter is E, and the subject is Extrinsic Allergic Alveolitis.
Extrinsic Allergic Alveolitis, EAA. What will this micro session cover? We will look at who is generally exposed to EAA, what EAA actually is, when, where and how EAA becomes a risk factor, and what can be done about EAA, Extrinsic Allergic Alveolitis. Firstly, an overview of the legislative framework. The Health and Safety at Work Act sits at the top. This is the filing cabinet within which everything else sits. So beneath that we have the regulations, we have the approved codes of practice, we have health and safety guidance from the HSC, and we have industry guidance. The Health and Safety at Work Act and the regulations are criminal law, which means we can be prosecuted for breaches of them. On the left-hand side, we have COSH regulations and we have the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations. Interestingly, COSH requires a risk assessment, and COSH also requires, in certain circumstances, health surveillance. This is the same as the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations, which under Regulation 3 requires a risk assessment, and Regulation 6 requires health surveillance, again in certain situations. The Health and Safety Work Act, then, very quickly, this is the primary health and safety legislation in the UK, sets out the responsibilities of employers and employees as well as others, and the Act also gives powers to the Health and Safety Executive to write and enforce health and safety legislation. So very quick overview in this micro session. Extrinsic Allergic Alveolitis. So we're straight up into the HSC website. EAA refers to a group of lung diseases that can develop after exposure to certain substances. The name describes the origin and the nature of the diseases. Extrinsic, caused by something originating outside of the body. Allergic, an abnormally increased hypersensitive body reaction to a common substance. Alveolitis, inflammation of the small air sacs of the lungs, the alveoli. Symptoms can include fever, cough, worsening breathlessness, and weight loss. The diagnosis of the disease is based on a history of symptoms after exposure to the allergen and a range of clinical tests, which usually includes X-rays or CT scans, lung function, and blood tests. EAA is not a new occupational respiratory disease, and occupational causes include bacteria, fungi, animal proteins, plants, and chemicals. Farmer's lung. So this is probably the most common one. Common EAA is farmer's lung. You also get pigeon fancier's lung. Pigeon lung comes from pigeon drop-ins. What we're going to focus on today is EAA from metalworking fluids. Over the last few years, I've been involved in a number of HSC improvement notices with regards to metalworking fluids. Again, it's not something you'll cover in any type of depth within a NEBOSH General, within an NCRQ for managers, or within your IOSH Managing Safely. It might get discussed, but it's certainly not a big part of the syllabus. So this really is one that can slip by the net, slip through the net of people who have got a NEBOSH General and they're out on the ground. This is something you need to know about. And there is one case we're going to look at as well from Powertrain. Yeah, the outbreak of lung disease at Powertrain in 2004. So exposure to contaminated metalworking fluids, MWFs as they're commonly known, has been responsible for workplace outbreaks of EAA in the US for the last 15 years and more recently in the UK. Metalworking fluids, also referred to as suds, coolant, slurry, soap, is a generic term covering a wide range of fluids used as lubricants or coolants for metal machining processes such as drilling, milling, and turning. EAA is not the only issue from physical issue from MWF. It can also give rise to contact dermatitis. The greatest risk of respiratory symptoms is in people working with water mix MWF. So, is there any guidance? Is there any guidance around? INDG 365. We'll cover that in a little bit more depth in a moment, but there certainly is guidance. But just to give those people who probably aren't that familiar with metalworking fluids, you can see metalworking fluids in action here. Again, sometimes referred to as suds. If you inhale the mist, aerosol or vapour during machining operations, then that can be an issue. Contact with the skin can be an issue. Remember, we're focusing on extrinsic allergic alveolitis, but also if you get it onto your skin, that can be an issue as well. So we'll have a look at that guidance in a little bit more depth in a moment or two. This is the interesting case for me. It was a case study for the NEBOSH Diploma. It was an outbreak of the disease at Powertrain in Birmingham. Powertrain Ltd went into administration in 2005 and was subsequently moved to China. So the executive summary, it's really worth looking through this document. It's not that many pages. 101 definite and probable cases of respiratory disease have so far been diagnosed. The outbreak significantly changes the perception of risk of respiratory disease arising from the use of water, mixed metalworking and water-based wash fluids. A key risk factor is the inhalation of harmful bacteria in metalworking and wash fluids from mist generated by metalworking and subsequent washing. Risk assessments for metalworking and wash fluids need to cover how harmful bacterial contamination is to be monitored. So in the risk assessment, you must evidence the control measures, in this case, the monitoring, whether you're using dip slides, refractometer, all of those things will become apparent in a moment as we work through this micro session. Respiratory health surveillance should be carried out where there is mist from metalworking and wash fluids. This means you're falling now under health surveillance, so you're probably going to be requiring the use of an occupational health professional. All users of metalworking and wash fluids need to be aware of the risks. Information, instruction, supervision and training. We've got to get that out to people. Okay, so this document is worth going through. There's a couple of shocks within this investigation. So it is worth reading through, especially where it talks about some of the risk assessments. Caution of the risk assessments must recognise the increased risk of serious respiratory diseases such as EAA and OA. OA is occupational asthma arising from metalworking and wash fluids. Really is worth flicking through. Introduction, it talks about the 101 probable cases. It talks about dip slides. So there's a reference there to dip slides. Let's just jump to the top here. Direct means of monitoring bacterial contamination, such as dip slides, are essential. We usually find there is not that much of a robust program in place utilizing dip slides. So a dip slide consists of a plastic container, a plastic carrier coated with a sterile culture medium, which is dipped into the liquid to be tested, is then incubated to allow microbial growth, and the density of the resulting colonies is compared to reference densities. We will have a look at that further in as we go through the session. So really worth having a look at that document and that case study, Powertrain. About metalworking fluids. HSC page again, very good page to work from. The main health risks, irritation of the skin, as we've said, and then we've got the occupational asthma, hypersensitivity pneumonitis, which actually is EAA, bronchitis, irritation of the upper respiratory tract and breathing difficulties. Worth looking on this page. It talks about how harm is caused, breathing in. This is the main source that we're talking about. It gives you then links through to the ECOSH essentials for metalworking guidance. Really worth going in here. Gives all the guidance how to manage fluid quality, what it covers, good practice, hazards, access to the work area, equipment and procedures. It's really, really worth downloading these documents And ultimately, you're going to need to involve this information within risk assessments. DIP slides, we've just mentioned that. DIP sites results, microbial growth, we've just mentioned that. Keeping your records, training and supervision, and then we've got essential information. So let's go back to, really is worth going on this page. Suitable and sufficient risk assessment. That's just going to take you through to the risk assessment on the HSE website. But we do have bacterial contamination, but it really talks deep there about the bacterial contamination and gives us the extra information and links through like the United Kingdom Lubricants Association. We're looking at a little bit more depth further on. But again, this page is a good page to work from. Control of skin risks, again, linked through to the essentials. So really important, very good part of the website. So we're talking about extrinsic allergic alveolitis. We're talking about breathing in mist from MWFs, metal working fluids, when we're working on machinery such as lathes. If we've got mist and we're breathing in the mists, that is the issue. We want to try and prevent the mists. We also want to make sure the sumps are clean, as we'll go through in a moment. But what this is telling us, there are health risks when workers are breathing in these mists. Here's one of the main standards, HSG 129. It's quite an old document. I remember this was probably one of the first books I actually got given to me. A really good book to have on your shelf, actually. Health and Safety in Engineering Workshops. We'll have a look at that in here, HSG 129, where we can put in here, well, actually, if we just go to the contents, really good document. Let's have a look. 5 steps to risk assessment. We're talking about lighting, how to lift safely, lifting equipment, moving vehicles, control of hazardous substances. We got LEV. We've got machining. We've got welding, flame cutting, radiography. There is a lot. Metalworking fluids at the bottom there. Health questionnaires, which we'll look at on page 121 in a minute. But metalworking fluids, MWF. Does it come up as that? I haven't checked. No, it doesn't. Let's write it in. Metalworking fluids. Metalworking fluids. Oh, come on. I know you're in here. Let's get back to the top. Okay. Control, common problems associated with flexible leads, milling, degreasing tanks. Okay. What do I need to do then? Metalworking fluids questionnaires. 121. Let's just go to 121 very quickly here. 121, 121. Next. Fire through. Really is useful way of navigating documents. Okay. Are we here? Yes, we are. Page 121. So we have Appendix 2, metalworking fluids questionnaires. Questionnaires for the detection of skin abnormalities. So if your risk assessment has determined that there is a potential exposure to metalworking fluids, then this is where you need to be going next. You're going to be thinking of getting in touch with an occupational health practitioner, professional, speaking to them, getting some guidance. If your competent person that you have inside the company or outside the company doesn't give you this knowledge, then you need to go to the professionals. You need to make sure that your risk assessment is robust, it is suitable and sufficient, and the outputs, if required, will be the provision of health surveillance. So a very important document. Really is worth looking at that, HSG 129. INDG 365. Here's the document we mentioned just now, working safely with metalworking fluids. This is a guide for employees. It's only 5 pages long. So it's worth downloading this document, turning it into a toolbox talk, delivering it to the staff. It is worth placing this document, printing it out, placing it near and up on the notice board in the machine shop. That is worth it as well. Get the guys and the girls to fully understand the risks and, importantly, the control measures. Here we're talking skin disorders there, but also we're talking about respiratory ill health, which is the main things that we're looking at. It talks about precautions. So this is me as an employee This is what should be available to me. I should be following the instruction and training given by my employer on safe systems of work when working with metalworking fluids. So this is going to be prevention of coming into contact, prevention of breathing in. If I'm responsible for the changing of fluids with the machine, it's going to be on the safe handling and use of metalworking fluids. Using splash guards where provided to control splashing and misting. Again, we don't want to put the MWF in the air. Minimising the production of mist and vapour by controlling the volume and rate of delivery of the fluid to the cutting edge of the tool. Again, this is going to be the people working on the shop floor are going to be heavily involved in this. Using any enclosures or ventilation provided. Allow a time delay before opening the doors on machine enclosures to ensure that all mist and vapour have been removed by the ventilation. This is a very simple but very effective measure. If you're on a CNC machine, by keeping the doors closed, by waiting until the mist dissipates and the vapour dissipates, then open the doors. I've been involved in a number of sort of risk assessments on machinery with the operators, and when we've tested the difference between opening the doors too soon and keeping them closed for a little bit longer, there is a major difference. And all that information can go into your risk assessment. Report any damaged guards, ventilation hoods, open workroom doors and windows to improve natural ventilation. Very difficult if it's the winter months, of course. This is an important one, but an also very difficult one. Don't use compressed air to remove excess metalworking fluids from machine parts or plant. I know it's difficult, but we shouldn't be doing it. We should not be using compressed air to blow anything. It's used a lot, and I know that, and I sympathise with people who do it. If the HSE see you doing it, it's going to be straight away, hang on, no, you're not to be doing that. You must come up with other ways of doing it. So that's a very good document. This document here is probably one of the best ones. Now, this is a good practice guide. It comes from outside of the HSE. It comes from the UK Lubricants Association. Thinking back to the slide, Health and Safety at Work Act, regulations, approved code of practices, HSE guidance, industry guidance. Here's some industry guidance. It's a very good document, 44 pages long, but really worth looking at. United Kingdom Lubricants Association, working with the HSE, a collaboration. So it really is a good document. We're not going to go through it all, of course, but let's have a look. What information can we glean from it? The law. What does the law require? Back into those risk assessments, those preventions. Health surveillance, we just mentioned it. Keeping records of checks, certainly for your dip slides and things like that, very important. Talks about your health, skin disease, lung disease, how to store MWFs, preparing working dilutions for MWF concentrate. So the mix quality is important. Too much, too little will affect the amount of mist and vapour that we get. Maintaining MWF, controlling exposure, we're talking about engineering controls, your LEVs, the performance of LEVs, compressed air lines, which we just mentioned, information, instruction and training, supervision, that takes us back to the Health and Safety at Work Act, the provision of appropriate PPE and RPE. PPE itself requires an assessment to see if it's the right PPE. A lot of the times when people put PPE in, they don't actually deliver PPE training. They don't consider the maintenance of the PPE. They don't consider the storage and housing of the PPE and the checks. If we're using any type of face mask as a protection measure, remember we're going to be thinking about if it's a tight-fitting face mask, we're going to be clean-shaven. We're going to need a face fit test. And we're also going to need monthly checks on that PPE. So there should be a PPE record to record it. Very important. Cleaning, safe disposal and glossary. Really good document. It talks about the risk assessment in here. It talks about reducing skin contact, choosing control measures, gives reference to the other documents, gives reference to the risk assessment documents. Health really is worth looking at. Get some posters up around the workplace, give that information out. Occupational asthma, debilitating conditions. Yeah, here it shows some health surveillance, the type that may be required. Lung function tests, storage. There is one area I want to get to here. PPE, maintaining, talks about biocides. We'll have a look more of that in a minute. You look at the deposit there with inside the supply tank, really bad. So on about the operating temperature as well. So as you can see, all this information has got to be recorded. So many places don't do it. So now we're looking at like the dip slides and things we talked about just now about checking the pH of the MWF. So important. We'll cover that a little bit in a little bit of time. Let's have a look here. Such a lot in here. So a refractometer is a handheld optical instrument to measure the working concentration of MWF based on the refractive index. Again, you can buy kits that include everything you need. I will show you later on. And what I want to get to is the use of, here's actually about the dip slides. When you're monitoring the bacteria, the fungi and the yeast, this is what we're looking for. We're not looking for any concentrations like that. Hence, this has to be done on a regular basis. If you don't do it on a regular basis, then you are breaking the law. It is as simple as that. What I want to get to is this. So this is the use of airlines, compressed airline. So as you can see, if you're removing metalworking fluids from a machined component, if a component's attached internally and you're just going to blow it off to clean it, to have a good look at it, then this does result in personal contamination, as can be seen there. So 3 good documents there. The UK Lubricants Association document, which is very good, worth looking at, INDG 365 and HSG 129. Back to here, resources, metalworking fluids. We looked at that. Engineering company fined for exposing workers to risk of dermatitis. Whilst this is not EAA, it's dermatitis, and this is recent. So under Regulation 7 of the Control of Substance Hazardous to Health Regulations. So what is Regulation 7? So under Regulation 7, we must prevent or control exposure to substances hazardous to health. This is going to be exactly the same for breathing in the mists. If we look at Martin Baker Aircraft Company, using the Cedric website, Cedric's very good. It's a very good offering if you want updates on. They do a lot of updates on compliance issues. Very good, actually. The Martin Baker Aircraft Company been fined £800,000 for breaching the control of substances hazardous to health regulations. 3 workers at the ejector seat factory in Uxbridge have developed debilitating lung conditions. And here we go. The fluid is a lubricant and coolant in engineering processes. When the machines are used, the fluid creates a mist, which was then breathed in by around 60 workers. This has led to at least 3 long-serving employees developing a serious condition. And there we go, EAA, Extrinsic Allergic Alveolitis. I mentioned earlier on about dip slides. This is quite a good website. We've ordered some kit from this before, dip slide website, and once you order it, you can order your kits, and the sale of these actually rapidly increases when the HSC are actually putting in targeted visits with regard to health issues in engineering companies. But really worth buying those. And this is a dip slide chart. Again, this is taken from dipslides.com. If I click on this, I can go back to the link. But you can see here that this is a dip slide chart where you will be measuring the bacteria levels, the yeast levels, the mold levels, the pH levels within the metalworking fluid. So if you're not doing that, if you're not testing it, you can't trust it. So it's very important to do those records. So that's it. Extrinsic allergic alveolitis. Who, what, when, where, how. We need to be thinking our employees should be protected by law, of course. There is COSH regulations. There is health surveillance requirements. There is dip slide requirements. There is recording. So E is for extrinsic allergic alveolitis.
So that's it. It really is simple. the knowledge we have and the decisions we make really can keep people safe. Today's letter was E, and the subject was extrinsic allergic alveolitis, not echidna, which is a little spiny anteater that lives in and around Australia, Tasmania and New Guinea. Thanks for watching.